What if I told you that William Shakespeare didn't actually author the world-renowned body of works he is credited for? You'd probably think I'm crazy, because why else would his name appear on so many comedies, plays, and sonnets if he didn't actually write them? We believe that Shakespeare's works were not the doings of William Shakespeare of Stratford-upon-Avon. Instead, it was probably an aristocrat writing underneath a pseudonym. Supporters of this theory include Mark Twain, Sigmund Freud, Henry James, Helen Keller, and many more. Twain wrote a book discussing his doubts, claiming that so far as anybody actually knows and can prove, Shakespeare of Stratford-upon-Avon never wrote a play in his life. Twain is referring to the uneducated grain merchant born to illiterate parents in 1564. Aside from lacking education, many skeptics base their doubts on the insufficient proof indicating this man was even a writer at all. Contrary to Elizabethan writers from his time, there are no documents conveying Shakespeare's literary career. As far as evidence suggests, William Shakespeare of Stratford was nothing more than an illiterate grain merchant, incapable of writing such eloquent literature. More importantly, the Stratford man left no literary paper trail, so we think it is highly unlikely he authored the body of works that revolutionized English literature. Contrary to popular opinion, we believe that Shakespeare of Stratford was uneducated and therefore unqualified to write such sophisticated and polished sonnets. It is claimed that Shakespeare attended Stratford Grammar School, but there is no documentation of him ever being a student there. This is likely due to the fact that schools back then didn't keep records of their students. However, the legacy of Shakespeare is so great that we would probably see his name pop up and letters from fellow students boasting about once attending school with the famous playwright, if he actually attended. But we have no record of this being true. In addition, it is unlikely that Shakespeare would have even gotten into the grammar school, considering his parents were illiterate and some reading ability was necessary to get into the school. We believe that whoever wrote Shakespeare received a superior education. The sonnets and plays display such comprehensive knowledge of the law that the true author must have undergone some formal legal training. In addition to legal knowledge, Shakespeare's body of work reflects wisdom of medicine, hunting, horsemanship, court life, military tactics, philosophy, classical mythology, and information that had not yet been translated into English. So, whoever wrote Shakespeare's plays can be clarified as one of the most literate people to have ever lived. And for this reason, we find it hard to believe that a once uneducated commoner be able to grasp so many concepts without ever experiencing or learning of these subjects in school. This is not to say that a man of humble origins could not have attained a world-class education, but how did he do it without a trace? Now that is a question that has plagued me for quite some time. I find it very ironic that one of the greatest writers this world has ever seen, in fact, has no written accounts to back up his literary career. There is no evidence throughout history linking the Stratford man to Shakespeare's large body of work. No evidence of a literary career exists for a man named William Shakespeare. The only documentation we have of the Stratford man's life exists in legal papers, among which we can find the 6 surviving signatures of Shakespeare, which is odd considering he wrote so many poems and plays throughout his lifetime but didn't bother to sign any of them. But instead, the only signatures we have been presented with can be seen in his will and deeds to his house. What's really intriguing about these signatures, though, is that Shakespeare uses 5 different spellings, and each one appears in different handwriting. The only explanation I can think of for this, as to why the Stratford man signed his name in various ways, is that he was illiterate and literally could not spell his own name. As for the different handwriting that can be observed, I've concluded that because he could not spell his own name, he probably could not write it either, in which case a law clerk would just fill in his signature for him. For a man that had trouble writing his own name, it's hard for us to believe that he was capable of writing such genius works like Hamlet. The signatures found on these legal documents suggest nothing other than Shakespeare being an uneducated common man, far from evidence indicating that he was a writer in his lifetime. There have been no other records suggesting that he was a writer, so I considered the possibility that maybe all personal documents had been lost and that there is no literary paper trail for any of the other writers from Shakespeare's time. So, to test this theory, I conducted a comparative study of 24 other Elizabethan writers to see if this was possible. I searched for any proof indicating that people like Ben Jonson or John Webster were writers in their lifetime, looking for evidence of them being paid to write, handwritten matters concerning literary works, records referencing the person as a writer, evidence of education, evidence of owning books, and notice at death as the person being a writer. Of all the 24 writers that I researched, I was able to find at least 3 supporting documents for these people's literary careers, everyone except for Shakespeare. In his will, William Shakespeare lists possessions like bowls, beds, and even forks that he wishes to pass down to his loved ones. But nowhere does he mention books, desks, or manuscripts, which would all be common possessions of someone who was actually a writer in their lifetime. And also, when William Shakespeare died in 1616, there was no eulogies from other writers and no tributes were made about his death. His death was basically a non-event in England, which contrasts with today where we have celebrations of his death commemorating his great body of works. Considering the Stratford man's lack of academic materials and compelling evidence of being uneducated, we have reasoned that it is nearly impossible for him to have written the great works of Shakespeare. Although his name may appear on some of the most profound literary works in the English language, we have reason to believe that William Shakespeare of Stratford is not the author of Shakespeare's works, considering his lack of education and uncorrelated biography to the writings.